Welcome, everybody. We will get started in just a minute. Thank you for joining us today. As you're logging in, please take a moment to rename yourselves with your name, your organization, and your pronouns if you would like. And we would love to see all of your faces. If you're able to turn on your video, that would be great. And we welcome all sorts of interruptions here at JPro, so don't be wary of what might be in your background. I'll give people another 30 seconds or so as we get started before making my formal introductions. We're really excited that you're all here today. And I learned recently at JPro that although we do like to start on time, sometimes on time can be a little bit funny when we're all working from home and running from other meetings. So we also like to give people another few seconds to join. But if Mark, if you're able to take off the screen share so that I can introduce you formally, that would be great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the entire JPro team, thank you for taking the time to join us for today's session. My name is Laura Herman, and I'm the Program and Evaluation Manager here at JPro Network. JPro is the organization that is by, of, and for professionals who work in the Jewish nonprofit sector across the United States and Canada. We have closed captioning available for today's session, which you can access by clicking on the 3 dots at the bottom of your screen and hitting Show Subtitles. Before we begin today, I want to just recognize that many of us are coming to our session thinking about the current situation in Israel. As this weighs on our minds, I'd like to offer a collective hope that safety for all resumes as quickly as possible. The JPro team is tremendously grateful to Mark Young for organizing today's program. We're really looking forward to learning more about his work. Mark recently wrote a book, Bless Our Workforce, which highlights how we can motivate and invest in staff across the Jewish nonprofit sector. Today, he'll be in conversation about making professionals feel valued, motivated, and blessed at work with 3 of the people that he interviewed for his book. Alyson, the Assistant Director of Camper Care and Enrollment at Crane Lake Camp, Carine Warsawski, CEO of Tribal Gatherings, and Graham Hoffman, CEO of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Community Foundation of Southern Arizona. Without further words of introduction, I will pass it over to you, Mark.
Laura, thank you so much. It is kind of a dream come true to be leading this session, after so many years working on this book, and also being on the JPro board for the last 8 years, just coming off of it now. So thank you so much to JPro for offering this opportunity, and thanks to all of you, friends I know and friends I don't know yet, for being in this conversation. If you'll allow me, I'm just going to share my screen and start my slideshow one more time. Before we welcome the panel, I want to set some framing because you may have heard of this book, Bless Our Workforce, that I wrote, and you may not know yet. So I want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as we get started with this important conversation. And also want to say that sending blessings to everyone who may be in harm's way and hoping for a peaceful resolution. I know that's where many of our hearts and minds are here right now, and I'm so glad you're with us this hour. So we're going to talk about what motivates our staff, our Jewish communal professionals, and we have 3 wonderful people who I interviewed for this book to actually share their own expertise of their own motivations. But as an educator, I want to bring you into the conversation from the very beginning, and I want to know, and we want to know from each other, who blesses you and who are the people that bless us. I want you to take a moment and think, and I would love for you to share in the chat who is a mentor or supervisor or teacher or other figure that has inspired you and helped you on your journey. And in chat, I want you to share your response. It could be anybody that has inspired you, that's supported you, that's helped you to get to where you are. And I look forward to seeing some of the chats come in. And they can be specific names, or they can be your board chair. They could be a parent. They could be a past supervisor. Look forward to seeing them come in and honoring them as people that I'm so glad you are part of the Jewish community profession, and it's because of them that we're all here. So I want us to think about what did they do to inspire or support you? You can think about that, not necessarily put it in the chat, but I want you to think about what they did for you, how they blessed you to get you to where you are today. And then I wonder, how might our staff answer these questions? How might we be in position, managers, leaders, directors, even people that may not directly manage others, but are managing all around? If we ask these questions, who inspired you? Who was the mentor on your journey, and what motivates you? As one way that we can bless our workforce. And I want to start this conversation with some insights. Getting to know each other deeply is the first step to blessing our workforce. And I'm excited for us to get to know a bit more deeply our three panelists in a few minutes. And we can start by asking a deep question that allows us to understand people's journey and what inspires them, because that is a window into what motivates them. And what I found through the research in this book, which I'll talk a little more about in a moment, having a mentor, guide, or someone who believed in their potential and passion, who guided and inspired them, is a blessing that has motivated most of the Jewish community professionals that I've come across, both in my research and anecdotally, and is a key force in the book, Bless Our Workforce. So I realized you may not know who I am, so I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Mark Spencer Young, and I want to bless our workforce. You can see this is my family. My day job is Director of J-Response at JCC Association, where I have the pleasure of training and supporting professionals as we navigate during and post-crises. But this is my family, and I want to share with you the question that I posed to you. Who are the people that have inspired me? My mom, may her memory be for a blessing, taught me all about the value of kindness toward others and oneself. My current supervisor, Sue Gelsey, the Chief Program Officer at JCC Association, who is attentive to my needs, challenging me with interesting and hard projects and giving me autonomy. Threads that I write about in the book as well. And actually, I'm going to put Carine, one of our panelists, on the spot. You've inspired me, Carine, for your relentless pursuit to fulfill your dream and your refusal to never take no for an answer. I don't think I would have gotten to this point of writing and publishing a book if I took no for an answer right from the beginning. So with that, want to share a little bit about the main thesis of this book, which will be a nice transition into this panel. What I suggest in Bless Our Workforce is that if we deeply get to know our people, we can learn how to best motivate and inspire them so they each feel blessed at work, and making that a priority in our own work. I firmly believe, and this philosophy believes, that each of us has the ability to ensure that Jewish life is the best place to work. Whether you are a CEO, a board chair, entry-level associate, whatever your title, wherever you are in the organization, we all have a role to play. And I imagine, certainly most of us, if not all of us on this call, and most of us that we work with, we have the intentions of wanting the Jewish community workspace to be the best place to work, to have our workforce feel blessed. But how do we make sure our actions align with our intentions so we can reach our full potential? The gestation of Bless Our Workforce came when I was working at the Jewish Theological Seminary about 4 years ago. I had already written articles and had an Eli talk on this idea of how we support best value our Jewish community professionals. But I went to my dean at the time, Dr. Bill Robinson, and said, "Kay, can I have a little time in my work to interview individuals about their own journeys?" The Leading Edge and the Leading Places to Work surveys is one example of how we're gathering massive data on this topic. But just like in the Bible, we learn from individual narratives. So how can we learn from the individual narratives of the people in our field? So I interviewed 13 Jewish community professionals, a fairly diverse group, although generally from the same age cohort. And I asked them a bunch of questions related to what motivates them. And then from each narrative, there was a big idea that came out. If everyone was just like this person, we would motivate this way. And I supported that idea, that blessing, through management theory and from the wisdom of our Jewish tradition. And I obviously won't go into each of these blessings, but these are the blessings that came out. They're both stand on their own, and they also interact with each other. And I am put in italics, number 2, build around our talent, number 7, cut the BS, and number 12, champion the relentless pursuit, because those came from the 3 panelists that we're going to speak to in just a moment. And the last thing I want to say before we get to the panel is the overall thesis of the book is also really based in Jewish tradition. It has been connected to Mat Tovu Oalecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael since my bar mitzvah back in 1990-something, in the portion Balak. And what does that mean? It means, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your houses of Israel. When the wizard Balaam was cast by the king Balak to go curse the Israelites, and after an altercation and with a donkey and a presence with God, blessed the Israelites instead? How might we go into our organizations every day and say something to the effect of, how goodly is our talent in our organizations, our workforce in this Jewish community, and put actions to those words to say that we are the wizards. We have the power to bless our workforce. So with that, I want to invite my panelists up to the stage, if you will. Laura, if you wouldn't mind spotlighting them. And we now have Alyson Bazely, Carine Warsawski, and Graham Hoffman here, 3 friends and colleagues. And this is a really wonderful moment because I've been waist deep into their narratives for a bunch of years, but I've never had them on a panel together talking to each other. So this is really exciting for me. I hope it's exciting for you. And what I'd like to do is give each of them the floor for about 2 to 3 minutes to start, to hear about you, your work, and specifically, obviously you can only say so much in a couple of minutes, what is one key moment in your journey that was influential, and perhaps that's related to a mentor or a guide that's inspired you, and why? So Alyson, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Mark. I'm so happy to be here today, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So when I was a teenager, I had the most incredible youth professional that I really connected with. She was a social worker and that really loved her job, and she loved her family, and modeled for me that you can be a parent who is present for your family and be an inspiring youth professional. So at first, when I graduated from high school, I had a number of credits that I received through high school and through our community Jewish high school. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be a religion major because I have so many credits. And I quickly got to college and I realized, I don't think this is for me, the religion major, because maybe I was going to be a professor. And so I ended up talking to my youth director about a social work degree. And I realized that that career path would allow me to pursue different avenues in the future, including maybe working in the Jewish community. So I started off my career as a hospital social worker, and I worked part-time for my youth professional in Miami, Florida, in the congregation. And I quickly it was so quick, I realized how much I enjoyed that work. Because at the end of the day, it's all like social work and youth work is all about the building of relationships. So I combined all of that and I decided I'm going to be a youth professional. So for a number of years, I worked in Miami and then on Long Island and in New Jersey, and I would spend my summers at Crane Lake Camp, which is a reform camp in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. So I think that relational model, or I know that relational model, is what brought me to the career and is what has kept me here all of these years. And so the path that I've taken has been a windy path. I've had, when I started a family, my needs changed and I needed more of a flexible work arrangements. So I've sort of had all of these different experiences in my job. But I have 2 key moments that I want to mention that were transformative for me. One was, my youth professional who showed me that I can be a parent and be in the Jewish world doing youth work, that I can do both. And the second was a supervisor in another congregation who told me that I couldn't have everything, at least not at the same time. And this juxtaposition of this advice from 2 people that I completely trusted helped me to realize that it was on me to know what my priorities are in different phases of my life and to advocate as hard as possible to have the work environment that I needed. And to be offered flexibility at particular times in my life when I needed it. And so listen, the Jewish communal world expects us to work 100% of the time, but what I needed to be successful looked different from that. So in my case, I wanted to feel present for my family and my career. And sometimes in Jewish organizations, we don't make the space for this, which is unfortunate and needs to be fixed. But since I couldn't control that, I worked hard to advocate for myself and create clear boundaries and pick jobs that worked for what I needed. And so, and I think, part of this also this year, I think we've seen as, we're realizing now that we can be a little bit more flexible. And the organization I work for, the Union for Reform Judaism, actually just announced when we get to Rosh Hashanah, that because it's Labor Day and then Rosh Hashanah, and there were 2 extra days at the end of the week, that actually they're going to be giving us that extra time at the end of the week, extra days off, paid days off to take the time to be with our family and be more flexible. And to me, I'm hoping that other organizations, or I know other organizations are sort of starting to follow this, and I hope that that flexibility will continue now that we've gone through a year of COVID. And so that's a little bit about my story and my experiences, and I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Alyson, thank you so much. And I appreciate you pointing out both the individuals in our journeys that inspire you for the right reasons, or individuals that may say the thing that feels opposite to what should be the case and motivate you to kind of go that other way, kind of proving them wrong, so to speak. And Alyson is a terrific camp director. My daughter will be going to overnight camp for the first time, and Alyson will be our assistant director. So I'm very excited about that. And you started to talk a little bit about the build around our talent that I wrote about in your blessing, and I'm going to come back to you on that in a couple of minutes. I next want to go over to Graham, coming to us from Southern Arizona. And Graham, in a couple of minutes, share with us a bit about your journey and someone that's inspired you along the way.
Yes. So I will say my journey actually began perhaps in an unusual way as it relates to someone who ends up working for the Jewish community, because I was determined not to do that. And I went to work at Accenture in for-profit consulting because I had this orientation growing up that there was a fixed pie of resources in the Jewish community, and I wanted to be contributing to that pie as opposed to consuming those resources as a professional. And I found working at Accenture to be an incredible professional development experience, and I really enjoyed being in a meritocracy where people were advanced on the basis of demonstrable excellence. But after being there for about 1.5 years, I recognized that at least for me, being on the sort of corporate ladder and constantly striving to get ahead from a financial compensation perspective, either for my company or for me, I would never feel like it was enough. I think it also helped that I was living in New York and New Jersey at the time, and you can never make enough in that context to feel as though you've achieved. But on top of that, I sort of looked at myself and I said, if this is my career and I'm going to be driven to constantly succeed, I'm going to work myself to death. And I don't see fulfillment and meaning in this work the way that I had growing up in the context of experiences in the community. And I was recruited by my former Hillel director, Rob Goldberg, to consider an opportunity at Hillel International. And the truth is, he was incredibly patient, because he came to me the first time after I'd been at Accenture for 1 year. And I said, I just got promoted and things are so great. And thank you, that's so flattering, but no. And he said, all right, I'll check back in with you. And he did every 3 months after that. And after I had been there for about 2 years, I came to this sort of recognition that perhaps I needed to try a different path and at least give it a shot. And so I took a leave of absence from Accenture for 1 year, and I went to work at Hillel International in their campus strategic services at the time, which was sort of like internal consulting to help local Hillels be successful. And that was a pivot point in my career. And frankly, it is because of Rob that I had 10 amazing years at Hillel International, and 5 years after that at APAC, and that I'm now not only leading a Jewish community foundation, but also a federation, which if you had told me when I was graduating from WashU, the very school where Rob was my Hillel director, until he left shortly, right around the time I graduated, I would have told you were crazy. And it has been an incredible journey so far.
Well, I want to write a note to Rob to thank him personally, not only because I've been friends with you, Graham, for the last few years, but the Jewish world is a better for it because you're in it. And thank you for sharing your journey. You talked a little bit about the value of having a meritocracy, the value of having a clearness in our organizations. We're going to come back to that vis-a-vis the blessing I wrote about you. But I want to get to Carine next, so you have a sense of all the 3 wonderful people on this panel. Carine, tell us a little bit about your journey and someone that inspired you along the way. You're on mute. Awesome.
Wow, as like somebody who's in a lot of trainings, that was a big faux pas. Thanks, Mark. So my journey really, I guess, it came from my parents. My parents are Peruvian and Israeli Jews, and that gave me a very strong connection to diaspora Jewry from a young age. My parents, as many of you may know, I now work in the camp space, but my parents had zero idea what Jewish summer camp was when they came to America. And it wasn't until a neighbor convinced them to send me to camp when I was 13, which is like elder status when you're a kid going to camp, did I really feel connected to the Jewish community in my own backyard. And camp immediately became my life. It was my language, it was my people. Everything I did was about feeling like I was at camp, in that place where you are just connected to your environment, that you are channeling your best self all the time. And I was like seeking out those experiences. And so because of camp, I decided to study abroad in Israel for a year of high school. I did EIE, now called URJ Heller High. I was there during the Intifada on September 11th in a very charged time. And I called my parents after a few weeks and I said, I'm not coming home. And they were like, the program's ending in December, you're coming home. And I said, no, I'm gonna stay for the year. And they ended up losing that battle. So I did my whole junior year abroad in Israel, which quickly made me an Israel person, even more than a camp person, I think. And I came back to study abroad at Hebrew U, and I was still working at camp during summers, but Israel started to become my new home, and I started staffing teen Israel trips. And you had mentioned in the book, I took a summer off to staff a secular program in Norway for the summer. That was amazing. It was like kayaking in the fjords and backpacking in a national glacier park. And even though a lot of the kids were Jewish, it was not a Jewish program. And I realized to really feel like you're on a journey, you need to have a sense of ideology and connection to the land, people, and place. And for me, that was a turning moment that made me want to go work back in the Jewish world, where I had been a participant on so many powerful, immersive Jewish experiences. So I worked in the Israel travel space for a decade. And on weekends, I worked at Living Social. I don't know if people remember that. It was acquired by Groupon in 2014. So this is while I was working for Birthright and Teen Tours, et cetera. And we were taking out thousands of young adults on weekends on these cool secular domestic experiences, like river tubing and barbecuing and wine tasting and vineyards and horseback riding and vinyasa. And one of these experiences was camp for adults. And it was like, I had this aha moment where I was like, why aren't we doing this Jewishly? The Jews get camp. We're really good at this. We should be creating Jewish summer camp experiences for young adults. So that's where the idea was seeded. I went to business school. I was accepted to the Wexner Graduate Fellowship Program, where in grad school, I worked at Startup Nation Central in Tel Aviv, where I saw people my own age running into the fire with their ideas for entrepreneurship, unafraid to fail. And I got inspired by them to pursue this idea of running camp for adults. And that's sort of where we are now with Tribal. And a mentor who's really been influential in recent years, I think I'm a collector of, I feel like I'm a collector of mentors, but Jonathan Schreiber, who's been a mentor through the Wexner Foundation and Davidson program, has just been just an incredible resource. I think like the nexus of my work is in balancing secular and Jewish inspiration, left and right brain, and the dearest mentors in my life are people who embody that. So Jonathan is a deeply creative, sophisticated thinker. He's available, he's supportive, both personally and professionally. And what makes him a good mentor is that he doesn't just offer brilliant advice, but he helps bring out the best in me through careful listening and teasing both that right and left brain mentality. So that's something I've really come to appreciate in the last few years.
So I want everyone on this Zoom to appreciate not only just the wonderful journeys that all of our Jewish professionals, Jewish community professionals have emblematic in these three here, but the points that I write towards the end of the book, that there was something that got you into the Jewish community, even if you weren't in the Jewish community professionally at one point. We have really fantastic missions and we have fantastic people that bring us in. And I want to raise that up. And to know that, for the last 4 years, been inspired by your stories as I've worked on this book and tried to figure out the best way to bring it to the world. What I want to do next is go back to each of you and highlight a little bit about the blessing that I highlighted based on your narrative. And I'm going to start with Alyson. So the blessing that I wrote about after interviewing you is called Build Around Our Talent. The idea that if I kind of create a schematic of happy staff, happy camper, happy camp, it doesn't have to just be at camp, that if we really focus and prioritize on what our staff needs and our staff interests are, they will be both more motivated and more excited to work. That will spill over. We can have high accountability for them onto our consumers, patrons, congregants, whatever it might be, and you'll have a more thriving organization. What I want to know from you, Alyson, as someone who's had to navigate, and you touched on this already a little bit, family with career, and being able to craft your own role in jobs, whether in synagogues or now in Jewish camp, how has that helped you grow and feel valued? And what would you want the people on this call to really glean from your journey as we're thinking about both our own motivations and those that we serve? And I just want to say that, the folks that I interviewed are not necessarily experts. I think they're experts in a lot of things, not necessarily on what I wrote about, but they're experts in their own motivations. And that's what I really want to glean out here. So Alyson.
Sure, it's a great question. So what I would say, one of the best comparisons is how I've crafted my career is picking classes based on the professor instead of the course. So this is common in college, but I extended that to where I work. So to me, the person that is leading is just as, if not more important than the mission. So for an example, when I met my current supervisor, Debbie, I knew she would fully get me. As a parent, she understood and modeled the flexibility I needed in order to be successful. And I'm so happy that I made the jump to work with her at Carine. And she also asked about my needs and how I wanted to be supervised, which was really important to me. And I knew right away that from those discussions early on, that I would work really well with her. I also, I think for most important for me is to know my boundaries. I didn't pursue things that weren't a good job fit for me. And I haven't been afraid to walk away. And I also have always wanted to continue to challenge myself and grow professionally. But I also want to acknowledge that this is a privilege to be able to do this. And I wasn't always able to do this early on, especially early on in my career. But the more I became established, I used the job interview process to truly interview who I would be working with and where I would be working. And because I really knew what I wanted and I needed, I was not afraid to articulate it, to ask it. And I would say, we're our own best advocates. And so I know that not everyone can leave their job and not everyone has a lot of options depending on the community that you're working in. But if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And so, I learned that not only when I asked for it, was it better for me, but it was better for other people. And so, once I was able to set the precedent of flexibility in my own job, other people felt that they could ask for it too, because they had been nervous before. And so I think it's important to think about the environment that works for you. And also if you're hesitant to ask for, to advocate for yourself, to remember that by doing this, you'll help others. And the other piece I think that's really important is that, I know with my social work degree, I had the ability to be a little bit more flexible in the work that I was doing because there's lots of different areas of social work that you can practice. And so I know that being nimble, being able to be nimble or looking for, can you shift something within your own job is something that I've always looked at and to continue to challenge myself. So that's another area that I really thought about as I've gone through my career.
And I want to raise up that, organizations have benefited from Alyson. And even though there's jobs that need to be done, you bring in the great people and those great people will deliver what you need for the organization. You may not necessarily fit a job description box coming in, but through that dynamic process of conversation, Alyson then comes in, does the great work. Even if you're flexible to her, you're building around that talent and we're all a beneficiary for it. And I think what you just said, Alyson, really transitions or demonstrates that. And it's actually a nice transition to Graham, because that is a process that might create more efficiency and transparency in our organizations. And Graham, when we spoke, you were still at APAC, and then you've since now are a CEO of two organizations in Southern Arizona. The blessing I wrote about after interviewing you was called affectionately Cut the BS, really about the idea of Jewish community professionals are motivated when they operate in systems that are efficient, that are transparent, that are clear. And what I want to know from you is, how has that evolved over these 4 years, and how are you thinking about that now, especially running an organization or a suite of organizations, if you will, for the first time?
If I think back on my career, when I was at Hillel, I spent a lot of time wishing that I had the kind of magic wand where I could make the kind of changes that I wanted. when I was at APAC, I was incredibly motivated by a culture of excellence and an organization that operates more similarly to a Fortune 500 company than a nonprofit, and sort of found myself really enjoying and appreciating a lot of those cultural sort of components. And then coming here to Tucson, on the one hand, I'm now fully empowered, so I can sort of on some level wave that magic wand and make changes to culture and expectations, et cetera. But it's my first experience in the Jewish space working in a local community, and making that change in a way that is in keeping with the culture of the local community and the notion of the values of that community and the expectations of that community has been a really valuable learning lesson and experience for me. And you know, I think we all in the Jewish world are cognizant of the fact that we operate in a sector that is undergoing immense change. Whether we like that or not, whether we want it to or not, the world around us is undergoing immense change, and the Jewish world is undergoing immense change. And equipping and adapting ourselves to be better at that change management work is a really essential, and I would argue almost existential need. And one that I think a lot of our organizations and agencies have not necessarily been well equipped for.
Thank you, Graham. And what I most appreciate about you and bringing your experience all the way back from Accenture onto now is challenging us where we need to be challenged for the good of the community that we want to serve. It's using this process of investment and clarity, this hard work that will actually make us better, more profitable, more mission meeting. And I'll mention towards the end, my inspiration is also Dr. Zen-Yat Tan, who wrote the Good Job Strategy at MIT, that talks a lot about how do we invest more in our staff and have operational excellence in order to be more profitable, in order to be more mission meeting, expanding the pie so we can do more, as opposed to thinking in a scarcity model. So Graham, I was like thrilled to amplify that, and you continue to be a model for me in helping to share that and seeing how that works in real time. Carine, obviously I shared how much I've been inspired by your story. The blessing I wrote about after interviewing you is called Champion the Relentless Pursuit. And I've just been inspired by your drive. You mentioned this at a conference in 2018. You were told no many, many times, this will never work. And you kept going anyway. I compared you, obviously I cite Jewish tradition or Jewish content or Jewish history in every blessing. I cite Herzl, right? If you will it, it is no dream. And now it's not a dream. Tribal gatherings is a reality, and you've even weathered the storm of the pandemic. And I just want to honor up, you just got a $1.5 million grant from the Marcus Foundation to expand that work. So Mazel Tov, kudos to you. Tell us more about this innovative spirit and this unending drive. And based on your experience, how can we foster people, whether it's within an organization or folks that are, you know, both intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial, how do we best motivate this unending drive based on your experience? You are muted again. Yeah, right.
I'm trying to be so respectful. Great questions. I think that no exercise, just to give some context, was something that I did, a professor gave to us in a business school negotiation class, where we were told that we had to go out and ask companies, individuals for favors or for like crazy requests. And we had to get 10 no's, like the answer, not no, like they had to say no to us. And it could be like, you wanted to return a jar of jam that you bought a year ago, that you like cut up clothing and wanted to get an exchange, that you wanted a free airline ticket somewhere for no reason. Like, and we had to get companies to say no to us. And the purpose of the exercise was to teach us that people are more inclined to say yes than they are to say no. And it was actually a lot harder to get a no than you thought. It took, on average, people 30 to 40 asks until they got their 10 no's. And the lesson is that people are more inclined to help than you think. And that in general, people want to be there to support you, even if you don't have a connection with them. And if you have that mentality, you open yourself up to more possibilities than you would otherwise think. It really is a mindset. So having done that exercise and knowing that it is possible to get the yeses, you just have to look in the right place. And not to be deterred by the no's. It stings, but you build those calluses eventually, and you have to remind yourself it's not personal. It's just not the right fit. And just to keep going forward. So that was a really important lesson when I was starting this journey and starting to face rejection, when I thought it would be a lot easier than it was. It took a long time. I think for me, drive doesn't come from checking off a to-do list. I know for many of us, it feels good to cross off those items at the end of the day, to have that empty inbox. But for me, it's not just the action of crossing off the items. It's a feeling of intrinsic reward you get from accomplishing a goal. And that overall feeling of work, of motivation, of you've done something right, you're on the right path. It's a sum total of small wins. It's not always just that one goal that you're setting yourself for. And for me, what I found that when I accomplish a goal, as small as it is, it feels good. And then you seek out the next one and the next one, and the goals gradually get bigger. So you can't just fall back on what you're comfortable with in terms of goal setting and checking out that list. Your goals need to grow, and you need to have that reference point to say, okay, my wins are going to start small and they're going to start getting bigger and bigger. I found that once I satiated that sense of accomplishment, I looked for the bigger one after that, and the bigger one. It's sort of like training for a race where you first run 1 mile and then 3 miles and then 5 and then a marathon. But it's not always about the distance that you've accomplished. The reward sometimes comes from speed, or from the feel of the course, from the scenery, or from the people cheering you on the sidelines. It really is about the overall journey. And I think like motivation comes from recognizing those extraneous factors that motivate you too, right? It's not always about what's on the checklist.
Carine, you're certainly speaking to me as someone who never thought I could run a marathon or write a book. And the journey is just as important. And just because no from someone doesn't mean no, not ever, no, that this is a good idea. It just might not be a right fit. And I'm thinking about all of the creative, entrepreneurial people in our organizations who have great ideas. How might we be the people that say yes to them and help them in a way that benefits us and them, and not the no's, whether the no's are intentional or inadvertent. And that's really powerful to me. I'm going to ask Sam Abudara of JPro to put up a poll, because we want to create, an interactive conversation here. And in the poll is going to be a few options of where you want me to take the conversation with these panelists over the next 12 minutes or so. So I'm going to wait for that poll to come in. There it is. Okay. So any one of these panelists can talk about each of them. We talked a little bit about building around the talent, also about cutting the BS, championing the entrepreneurial spirit or the relentless pursuit. And we also threw in, well, this book was largely written before COVID, although I've incorporated some conversation around COVID-19, but how might this adapt during this COVID and post-COVID era? So I appreciate everyone putting ideas through. And I think as people are voting and then we continue the conversation, I just want to share that there's a lot of dots connecting here. Building around the talent is about cutting the BS and being more efficient. Creating innovation is also thinking about where our talent is, and not, and how that meets the overall mission. So there's a lot of dots connecting, and if I'm humbled enough that you grab the book and read the different blessings, so hopefully you'll see not just the individual lessons, but how they connect to each other. So why don't we close that poll? We've got most people signed up, and it's pretty even. I'm at least seeing the responses, but just ahead of everything else is how can we best motivate staff in the COVID and post-COVID era. You may not have seen the results. Now you see the results. So that's where we're at. So we might touch on some of the other ones too, but I want to drive to that. I'm going to open this up to each of you, being an assistant director of a camp in a startup innovative space, and, leading organizations that are legacy, however you want to call federations and foundations these days. I'm not sure if those are the right words. And I want to ask from each of your perches, how do we think about these motivational strategies, these blessings, in light of the pandemic, in light of what we've dealt with over the past year? And though the pandemic may or may not recede in the coming months, the effects of it will continue, whether it's the mental health effects or a lot of us getting used to working primarily from home, although not all of us. What rises to the top? Again, speak from your own motivation, or similarly from the people you're directly working with. And why don't we go in the reverse order this time? So Carine, if it's okay, I'll start with you, and then we'll do Graham, Alyson. And if you want me to go somewhere else first, I can do that so you have a chance to think.
I think I need like another minute to put some thought into that. But I would say motivating people now is all about the small moments, and not necessarily recognizing, like giving people the recognition just for accomplishing tasks, but also for showing up in ways that maybe are beyond their job description. And I think people want to be seen as holistic people in the workplace, and recognizing their contributions beyond where you may have expected them. I think we all put a lot more into our jobs than our job descriptions ask. And like acknowledging people for when they show up in those ways makes a big difference in terms of their buy-in to the organization, to the work. I think like I've worked at companies in the Jewish world and without that have incentive structures like financial bonuses and other kinds of benefits, and like maybe asking employees to choose their benefits, and not just like the healthcare, the vision, the, you know, the 401k, but like what benefits do you want in the workplace, and what does that look like in helping design those incentive structures in ways that speak to them.
So before I turn it over to Graham, I want to just raise up a couple of things that you just said, mainly not only that they want to be seen doing different things, but I think Jewish community professionals want to be seen. And there's two other blessings in the book that kind of talk to each other. One is that it's not about them, that the Jewish community professionals that I've engaged with are actually very humble people that don't want to be the center of attention. They just want to raise up everybody else. And at the same time, we want validation. And some of that sometimes is validation that allows us to do other things that may not be in our job description, but are passionate towards us. So how do we get people to be seen and getting them to do the things they want to do, not just they need to do, as a way of contributing through, you know, this lens of humility, as I write. So Carine, thank you for raising that up. Graham, how about you?
I'll share some practical stuff. As somebody who, you know, has teams that I've been trying to really work deeply with through this process, I have a couple of, I think, really practical things. One builds on what Alyson said earlier. It has been really difficult for people to take meaningful time off during the pandemic for all the reasons. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? If you're bringing your kids with you, is it even a vacation? So there's a whole host of reasons why it's been difficult during the pandemic. And we've done two things that I think complement each other in a meaningful way from that perspective. First of all, we instituted a vacation accrual cap. And that may sound counterintuitive, but what it does is it prevents staff from accruing additional vacation when they get beyond a certain number of hours. For us, it's 180 hours, so quite a lot, but still. And why? Because it forces them to actually take their vacation. And I have seen a dramatic increase in the number of my staff, especially senior staff, who have taken vacation as a result of the cap. Now, I also had to model that behavior, so I have also taken vacation because of the cap. But it was really important to me. Nobody lost any vacation that they had accrued, but they stopped accruing more vacation until they started to take some. And the second thing that we did in parallel, and the two do fit together, is, to Alyson's point, we offered several periods of time that were slow time anyway, when we closed the entire office for everyone. So the week between Christmas and New Year's is a great example of this. We closed the office for everyone. And why did we do that? Because during the pandemic, we learned that when you take vacation, and this is the case all the time, but especially during this period, and you come back to 550 unread emails or a million exchanges between your colleagues that took place that you're now supposed to catch up on, it feels more like punishment than vacation. People need to be able to unplug, and they need to understand that when they come back, there's not going to be a huge pile waiting for them beyond what they had before that they then take 4 weeks to try to dig out of. And by doing that strategically at different points during the year and closing the office for everyone, we created the expectation that no work would take place during those days. And we shared that expectation with our board and our stakeholders, and everyone supported us and understood, like, people need to be able to take time off that is just time off. Now, I couldn't overcome the issue that they couldn't travel, but I'll share two other interesting ideas that relate to getting us back to whatever the next normal looks like. Number one is we're offering, and I haven't announced this to my staff yet, so if any of them are on here, this will be a first opportunity, but we're going to have a staff meeting next week where we're going to announce it. We're offering a day of PTO to everyone who gets vaccinated and brings in a record of their vaccination, an additional day of PTO. And that's meant to accomplish three things. One, we want everyone to know that we want you to be vaccinated. Two, we want to give you time, recognizing that getting vaccinated takes time, and some people even had to take sick time to be away and recover from it. And three, we want to actually know how many of us are vaccinated. And by offering a small incentive, we have a great likelihood of everyone who's vaccinated telling us. And then we can decide, and in Arizona, the law is different than in some other states. We can actually legally mandate vaccination for all of our staff. We have not decided to do that yet, and I hope we won't have to. I hope we'll discover through the incentive that everyone's been vaccinated. But in order for many of our colleagues to feel comfortable coming back, and we are a people-driven business, we've been able to manage on the basis of relationships we cultivated over many years over the course of the pandemic, but we won't be able to do that indefinitely going forward. So we have to get back in front of people and be convening them again. And in order to do that, we need everyone to be as safe as possible. And so creating more incentive around the vaccine before we might need to choose to mandate it at some point was an important development for us.
Graham, so many important practical applications in what you just shared. I want to raise up Dr. Betsy Stone has had a series of articles in eJewish Philanthropy recently about burnout in the Jewish community. She and I speak frequently about this. And I think some of the suggestions that you made speak to that. And I'll also raise up my current employer, JC Association, who last August, we have a slow week, the week before Labor Day, we were all closed. And we're like, you've been working hard all spring and summer. It's been stressful. And they're actually going to do that again this year too, which was nice because you're missing nothing. So you bring up a good point there. A colleague of mine used to say that Jewish world is part-time is full-time and full-time is all the time. So when you're off, you're not actually missing all the time. You're just not missing it, and which is maybe would alleviate some of that stress and build around the town a little bit. Which brings me back to Alyson. Alyson, what are you thinking in terms of post-pandemic? And it's been a year of pandemic, it's been a year of racial justice, and now the situation in Israel is a lot of stress. How are we thinking about motivating people right now, or yourself?
So in addition to the time off that we're going to have at the URJ in the fall, the one other thing I've been thinking a lot about is disruption. So first of all, the COVID, it's been such a tragic experience for the whole world this entire year. And one of the, on the flip side, one of the positive things I think that's come out of this is this idea that we can work from home and we can change the way that we think about the way that we do things in our organization. So, when I started at Crane Lake Camp in November of 2019, and I asked for, to work from home on Fridays, so I didn't need to commute into, almost an hour from where I live in New Jersey. That was like it was not a usual request. And so of course it was granted. But then who would have thought, 4 months later, that we would be in a situation where we would all be working from home. And so I think mine's more not a specific something that you can do, but more of a, we didn't think we could do any of these things a year ago, and all of a sudden we can. So what are the areas that we could actually be flexible in within our workplace, that maybe someone comes to us and asks us something and we can actually grant them that request, where we might have said a year ago, I don't know if that can happen, and now we want to be a little bit more flexible. So that's what I'm sort of thinking about, is what are the needs of the people that we're working with, and can we create an environment, if we haven't already, where they can come to us to share those, and think about, can we actually meet those needs in what will be a hopefully soon post-COVID world.
I love that, Alyson. It makes me think the idea of how do we return forward and not return back. And I think Alana Azen, the CEO of JPro Network, I said, what are the things that we've done temporarily that should actually become permanent? Or at least much more open to where we were 2 years ago. So I think there's also another practical application. I have one more question for the panel, and then I'll do a few more minutes after that. And just in 30 seconds, you've all been a huge part of this book journey in different ways, and you've all been intimately involved. How might anyone else on this call, anyone listening, use a resource like this in your work? These 13 blessings, this combination of ideas and narratives. How might you use it? So why don't we start with Graham first, and then Alyson and Carine.
I mean, I'll say a couple things. You know, Mark, for me, it was a really special privilege being a member of your Wexner cohort and sort of watching you go from the idea of this book to could I actually write a book to I have a book coach and I'm writing a book to the book. And to me, like you know, on the one hand, this is not a story about you. And on the other hand, it is deeply a story about you. And I think that there's so much that our colleagues around the country and around the world can learn from your example, that we have the ability to find insights and to advance our work in the lessons that we learned from all of the professionals in our field. And these 13 people are the 13 people that you happen to, you know, sort of identify, but in reality, none of us is unique or, you know, terribly special or more so than anybody else who's on this call with us today. In fact, we can learn and glean these important lessons from our own journeys, from the journeys of our colleagues and friends, and from those that we admire and who have been so influential in our careers. And for me, that's the biggest lesson to take away, is that there's so much that we have to teach and learn from each other. And the more that we engage with one another around these things, the better, stronger, and more capable we all become, and the more we can advance this field.
Thank you, Graham. Alyson.
Graham, you stole exactly what I was saying. I think I'll just echo what you said, that I think that being open to change and hearing the stories and reading the stories of different people, I think will make us all better supervisors and better colleagues. And so I think that if you can go into it, you know, with open eyes and open hearts and be willing to make changes, I think you will have a team that will be so much happier and so much more open and willing to communicate with you what their needs are. And you'll see, I think, better, even better work than they're doing already.
Thank you, Alyson. Carine.
I think just recognizing the human side of leadership that is in the field. I feel like I've read a lot of books from other, CEOs of corporations and their leadership stories. And this is a chance to see a really diverse cross-section of human leadership and the human side of change, and to dig deep and inquire within yourself and your staff the same attributes and questions that, Mark, I think you asked us, are fair to ask people on your staff also, and see what kinds of doors those open and how people can relate to each other in a more human way.
Well, Carine, thank you so much. Alyson, thank you so much. Graham, thank you so much for being here today on this panel, and also just being part of this project for the last 4 years means the world to me, and I think to everyone on this call. We've learned a lot from you. I want to share a couple of larger learnings, both from the book and from this conversation. If you'll allow me, I'll just go back to my PowerPoint very quickly in just a couple of minutes. One is this idea of this virtual cycle. I mentioned both in the chapter on Graham, and also in this conversation, this idea from Dr. Zenyap Tan of a virtuous cycle, that instead of looking at our human resources as cost centers, as things that we may need to minimize because we're in a scarcity model and there's only so much to go around in a pie, how do we actually look at it the other way and say, we're going to invest in our staff, in our talent, we're going to build around them, we're going to make it more efficient, we're going to champion their creativity, and we're going to, by doing that, create more operational excellence that will actually create a stronger institution, higher revenues, higher meeting of mission. Zenyap Tan studied this in the retail market. I think it is 100% there in the Jewish not-for-profit space as well. And much of the book and much of this conversation revolves around this idea. We talked about the blessings from each individual chapter or blessing, but I also want to raise up in every single of the 13 conversations, what were the things that were really motivating everyone? And we heard this today: mentorship, people that inspired or supported us along the way. Meeting of the mission. We have the best missions, I think, in any organization, in any field. And how do we amplify and make that mission more explicit to people's work? Malleability or flexibility, thinking about what the staff needs and interests are and build around them. And then, probably one of the most recognizable prayers in Jewish tradition, Shema, Are we listening to each other? And not only listening to our staff and to each other, are we making sure that they feel heard, they feel validated? Even if we can't promise or deliver on everything that they want, even having that dynamic conversation can go a long way to motivating and valuing our Jewish professionals. And I had such a wonderful job listening and learning and validating and creating stories and creating lessons and blessings around the 13 people that I got to know through this project. So I leave you with a task should you choose to accept it. What's one thing you'll commit to now having been on this hour together? And I so deeply appreciate you being on this hour. Who will you schedule deep conversations with? Maybe ask them about their career journey, who's inspired them, or what they feel motivates them and makes them feel valued. Give them an opportunity for reflection. You might learn a lot about them that you didn't know, and you might learn a lot more about yourself, and then also about your management practice and your professional practice as well. Share those ideas. And remember the big insight that investing in staff motivations doesn't take away from our JCCs or Jewish federations or anywhere else you might work. I happen to work in the JCC movement, but it's core to our growth as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Laura. I have the book website there, and I just want to again thank all of you, as well as Graham, Alyson, and Carine. So Laura, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you again. Thank you to Carine and Alyson and to Graham. This was certainly a very insightful hour together. I learned something from each of you. So I really, really appreciate that. And on behalf of the entire JPro team, I also wanted to say thank you for all of the preparation work that you did. A number of people have asked about where they can learn more about Mark's book. So my colleague Erica will put in the chat a link to where you can purchase the book if you are interested, and a link to his website, which will give you a little bit more information. And as a final word of closing, I just want to say that JPro has a number of other programs on offer right now. There are several master classes coming up, two of which I would like to highlight for you. One is called Design Thinking for Empathy and Innovation, and the other is a racial justice class for Jewish community professionals. My colleague Erica will also put the link to finding out more information about those in the chat. And we would really appreciate your feedback on our time together. So there's a short, really like 2 or 3 question form for you to fill out. And if you could take a moment to do that, that would really help us. So I want to give people an opportunity to get to their next meeting and to have a quick breather before the rest of their day. This was a welcome break for me in my work to think more deeply about how we can invest in our talent and motivate people. So again, thank you so much to Mark and to Alyson, Carine, and Graham for participating, and we hope to see you all again soon.